In the previous video, we covered a one-way stop. If you've watched that video, you may have been surprised at just how many variables can contribute to things going wrong at a stop street. Here we're covering a four-way stop, and so this exponentially increases the complexity of what can go wrong. And it can range all the way from something that is fairly straightforward and simple to a scenario that is very complex and hard to read and try and decipher in order to cross safely. In the first animation, what it's demonstrating is really the most important general rule at a four-way stop, and that is whichever vehicle arrives at the stop sign first is the vehicle then to cross the intersection first. Let's have a look at that. Here we've got the blue vehicle arriving at the stop sign first. So that's the first vehicle to go. Next we have the green vehicle arriving. So the green vehicle to go. The third is the white vehicle arriving at the stop sign. So that's the next vehicle to go. And then lastly, the yellow vehicle arriving at the stop sign and the last vehicle to go. So that's fairly straightforward. Now it gets a little bit more complex. In this animation, we're having a look at what is very similar to the first animation, but with a little bit of a variation. So blue vehicle arriving first to go. Green vehicle next to go. White vehicle next to go. However, we have here the yellow vehicle that has arrived next. And it's just slightly ahead of the red vehicle. So the red vehicle arrives a fraction of a second later. So by all rights, it should be the yellow vehicle to go after the white vehicle. However, if it's a situation where the red vehicle can cross at the same time as the white vehicle, because the yellow vehicle has to wait for the white vehicle to cross anyway. So if the red vehicle can sync its crossing to coincide with the white vehicle so that it doesn't unnecessarily hold up the drive of the yellow vehicle, well, then it's fine for this vehicle to cross at the same time as the white vehicle because the driver of the yellow vehicle has to wait anyway. That's provided that the driver of the red vehicle isn't that much later in crossing that he now is going to hold up the driver of the yellow vehicle. So it would depend. If the driver of the red vehicle arrived early enough to sync his crossing along with the white vehicle, so he doesn't hold up the driver of the yellow vehicle, well, then it's fine for him to cross, even though he might have arrived at the stop sign a fraction of a second later than the driver of the yellow vehicle. If, on the other hand, he's going to be too late to sync his crossing along with the white vehicle so that he holds up the driver of the yellow vehicle, well, then it's better for him to wait in that situation. So you can see it starts to become a little bit more complex. What we're going to have a look at is the question that's posed on the website covering stop signs. So there is a section, a link on the website, which asks a question: what if all four drivers arrive at the four-way stop at the same time? Who has then got the right of way? So let me say at the outset that each situation is unique, and it depends on that particular four-way crossing, the number of vehicles, the distance between the vehicles at the intersection. So also a whole host of factors that can be involved. But generally speaking, if the drivers that have all arrived at the same time, the best thing to do is to see if you can observe the drivers of the other vehicles, and by means of hand signals, perhaps indicate to one another as to who should go first. But also bear in mind that there may be reflection off the windshield or the windscreen, so that the other drivers may not be able to see your hand signals, or vice versa, you can't see their hand signals, and so that can also lead to confusion. So where appropriate, one could even flash one's lights to indicate to the other drivers that you're giving them the right of way to go. And so one has to read that specific situation. What I find generally is that if you're just courteous, you wait for others, then that normally works out well. But there's also a downside to that, because that courtesy that you're demonstrating might lead to unnecessary delay, or it might throw out the synchronization of the traffic, or it could lead to confusion. So provided you're courteous, but it doesn't in itself now lead to some sort of confusion amongst the other drivers, well, then it's best just to be courteous. And you find that if you wait until you know that it's certain for your time to cross and you cross, then things normally work out fairly well. And so it's best also, aside from the first direction, that whoever arrives first is to cross first. But generally what's also a good thing to allow to happen is that vehicles facing each other, that they cross simultaneously. So if there are a whole line of vehicles arriving at the intersection, then those vehicles facing each other cross, and then the vehicles adjacent to those vehicles, so in other words, at right angles to those vehicles then facing each other cross. And so it's synchronized, that the directions one way and then the other way. So if you can keep that synchronization, then you find that it actually works fairly well. And it's easier if it gets done that way, because you only have to keep the flow of traffic in one general direction and then the other general direction. There are situations where people just become overwhelmed. So bear that in mind, that when there's a lot of vehicles, a lot of flow of traffic and so on, that some drivers may not be able to read the situation properly and they become overwhelmed and a bit indecisive and confused. So just exercise patience, that other drivers can then pass and you go across when you know that it's safe for you to do so. What is a no-no at a crossing, an intersection, is where you've got one vehicle behind another vehicle, so that when the vehicle in the front crosses the intersection, the vehicle behind it thinks that it can go across at the same time. That's a definite no-no. If the vehicle in front of you crosses the intersection, then don't cross along with that vehicle. Come to the stop sign and stop, and rather wait for others then to have their turning crossing. You can't try and quickly shoot across because the vehicle in front of you is going across. Now we'll see that in the first real life clip. So here we have the vehicle going across, which is fine. The camera now arrives at the stop sign. So the camera waits for this vehicle to go across, the next vehicle to have its turn. But while the camera is waiting now for this vehicle to come across, the driver behind this vehicle thinks, oh, well, he can quickly cross at the same time. So that is a definite no-no. If you're the second vehicle in line, you've got to get to the stop sign and you wait for the other traffic to go first. Don't think you can quickly take a chance and shoot across. That'll just infuriate the other drivers. The next real life clip, we've got the truck going across, which is fine. We've got that vehicle waiting on the opposite side. That vehicle then goes across after the truck has moved out of the intersection, which is the right thing to do. This driver is now waiting for this driver to come across, so all of them behaving exactly as they should. The camera now at this point arrives at the stop sign, so is waiting now for this vehicle to come across. So it's now the camera's turn, but lo and behold, the driver behind that driver thinks he can quickly now shoot across because the vehicle in front of him is gone. So he's the second vehicle in line and he quickly takes a chance. So as we said, that's a no-no. I just want to stop it at this point because that driver that was second in line that had shot across, I notice his reaction. He's shaking the fist at the camera. Even though the camera was in the right then to go, this chap wasn't in the right to go along. Yet he's lashing out at the camera. And so you find people are like that. You get those odd ones. Generally speaking, people do the right thing. And if you're courteous, they respect that and appreciate that. And they reciprocate with such courtesy. But you do get those odd, selfish, self-centered drivers on the road. And whatever they do, they think they're in the right. And when you come across a situation like this, rather just let it pass. It's not worth trying to retaliate in any way. So four-way crossings can become very complex, and unfortunately it's only experience that one builds up that will help you to be able to read the finer nuances of what happens at a four-way stop. Generally, as I approach a four-way stop, I try to read the traffic holistically. So in other words, not to just focus on specific drivers, but try to gain a broad view. So in other words, have quite a wide range of view and take in the whole traffic situation. So as I'm approaching the four-way stop, I try to decipher and see what movement exists throughout the intersection. And that's only, as I say, over a period of time that one builds up this experience so that you're better able to read the situation. When you're younger and less experienced, it's not always easy. But the best thing to do if you're unsure is to rather hold back until you know that it's your turn, but not trying to cause confusion to other drivers if it is your turn to go now and they're waiting for you and you're not going. So you've got to try and read that quite carefully. But the one thing you also don't want to do is to be indecisive in crossing an intersection, because when you're indecisive, then others are also unsure and confused of what it is that you're going to do. But generally speaking, I find that if it's a very complex situation, I'd rather hold back, let others go until I know that it's certain for my turn to go ahead and it's safe to do so. So I hope this helps. Please like, subscribe, and get notified.